Hey guys, welcome back. So this video is a continuation of last week's video where I reviewed last year's wish list and what I obtained from that, and then talked about 2024's wish list. Although if you read the description to that video, I know a lot of people don't read descriptions, but I did say I have a secondary wish list of plants that I never hope to obtain, or at least not anytime soon. And a lot of these plants are like probably logistically impossible to obtain. Maybe not impossible, but very not that possible. So these are plants I've kind of like separated out as like plants to fantasize about, but never expecting or trying to ever obtain them. And I thought that might be interesting to some of you. And I'm not gonna say it never obtained for these, just because like things can change so quickly and things are so mobile globally for plants, but not really in some cases, which we'll talk about later. And I don't know if this is an unpopular opinion, but I don't think that all plants need to be accessible. In fact, I find a lot of positive in a lot of plants not being obtainable, just because like in the hobby, we have like the cultivating side, the growing side, and then we have the collecting side. And I feel like these two really balance each other out. So when you kind of take a break from, you know, the growing side, you can have the collecting side, the thrill of the chase, to kind of keep things spicy. So I really enjoy the fact that there are plants that I think that I can pine after and aspire to collect. So I have 8 plants, I think, to talk about. I will be looking at my phone every now and then to remind myself what they are. One of them is kind of like 2 plants. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I'm going to kind of order them roughly from most attainable to least attainable. Although in saying that, that's kind of just like a guess on my part. And of course, what's more obtainable for me might be the complete opposite for you. But if you watching this own any of these plants, I would for sure love to hear your growing experience, how you feel about them, like in real life. Do they live up to the supposed hype around them? Okay, first plant, very expensive plant, but is definitely obtainable if you got the cash. That is anthurium circus peanuts. So actually, I'm gonna move over here. Circus peanuts is a hybrid between Dressleri and versicolor. And it is a one-off, so if you get a circus peanut itself, it's not necessarily gonna look like this. So it's kind of similar to Delta Force. I've been wanting this plant for quite a while now, and it is completely out of my bracket, but I have seen like little tiny cuttings of it going for a few $100s. So it's not like break the bank, sell all your whole collection in order to get this. From what I've been reading, it's kind of varied in terms of how fussy it is to grow. Some people say it's like quite easy. Everyone I see growing it on Instagram and Facebook is growing it inside of a greenhouse. Some say it took a while to dial in the conditions to get it to actually grow. I would guess that the hybrid vigor in this plant means that it's not going to be the most deathly difficult plant to grow. So my friend Jesse owns this plant. I'm very curious to see what his experience is going to be like. He didn't obtain it that long ago, so he is growing it, I believe, in room conditions, in living room conditions in Vancouver in Canada, so we will see. But what I love about the circus peanuts is that it took on so much of the Dressleri, in my opinion. It doesn't look that much like a versicolor to me, except that it's not velvety like a Dressleri, but it has that Dressleri venation, that very puffy, pillowy, with the dark veins, the very minimal yet dark veins. It has a little bit of like a frilly edge. It has such beautiful reddish emergent leaves, and even the hardened off leaves are just so beautiful. But I'm such a texture person, so the fact that it has so much dimension in it, it's just beautiful. I honestly feel like I put it on the top of this list just because there's one person in my friend group that has this plant, but also because I wouldn't be surprised if it's being TC'd at the moment, just because we saw how prices dropped so quickly and so dramatically for the Delta Force, which was like maybe $10,000 just a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago. So I wouldn't be surprised if circus peanuts was kind of in some sort of TC program. So that's why it's kind of at the top of this list, but at the same time, right now, it is very expensive to get. And like the few $100 cuttings I was talking about earlier, they're like probably this big. And then similarly, there are like circus peanut selves going for quite a lot cheaper, obviously, because they don't look perfectly like a circus peanuts, but they bear some resemblance to a circus peanuts. But yeah, this plant is also known as Mike's Goliath, but it was nicknamed circus peanuts because of the candies that the inflorescence smell like. It's like a very artificially sweet kind of, I've never smelled it myself. I think this is like an old-timey American candy that I don't think is found in Canada. So if you have smelled both, let me know if that is actually true. But yeah, I don't think it's registered as circus peanuts, but that is the nickname that has stuck. The next one, I'm trying to see which one might be more obtainable. Okay, I'm gonna choose this one. It's not that obtainable, but it is obtainable in a way. So this is the Juan Carla. Juan is Gay Plant Ho on Instagram, and his Carla he has nicknamed GPH001. So GPH standing for Gay Plant Ho. So his Carla has long been considered like one of the prettiest Carlas in the hobby. It's not like he went out and collected it, but he has had this for years. I've been following Juan for pretty much since I started my Instagram, and he's had that Carla that whole time, and I've always admired it. And his Carla really blew up last year. So he did release one batch of selves, and those self seedlings are just jaw-droppingly beautiful. They're so mean looking and they're so narrow, but the veins are just, they drop off in that way that Carla does, but they're really like, they don't really go as far down towards the leaf margin as other ones, and it's like thick but minimal at the same time. A lot of the standout specimens of that batch are very narrow. To my knowledge, he's never sold cuttings of his Carla before, but I mean, if he did, I probably wouldn't know about it anyways. So the reason why it's on this list as unattainable is because the price of his Carla is very high. Carlas aren't cheap to begin with, but his is definitely one of the more expensive specimens. And he's also stated that he's not planning to sell his Carla anytime soon. His collaborations with other growers and their Carlas, so still pure Carla using his plant as either the pollen parent or whatever, they're not as expensive as just a pure Juan Carla. So it is on my wish list. I don't ever expect to own this, but it is one Carla that I think really just steals my heart. I freaking love my Carla. That is one plant that I never expected to obtain. So I'm not like pining after this in such a way that like I'm like, I will do whatever it takes to get it. But I think as far as wish list plants go, and as far as all the plants on this list, I think it is still probably at the very top for me. But I'm saying it's attainable in the sense that like there's quite a few of these out there in North America where I am, where when people grow their specimens out, they could be cutting and sharing and stuff like that. So it's just a little bit more within my reach than other things on this list. Okay, the next one is, I hate calling plants the Holy Grail, but this plant has been called the Holy Grail. This is SP Nova DF. So the DF stands for Dewey Fisk. He sadly passed away a few years ago, but he was a very well-known, respected, and beloved grower, collector, and he owned a nursery, and his partner was none other than Ralph Lynam. But he had an amazing collection, and this suspected Portier mutation or related to Portier plant was named after him. And it hasn't been formally classified yet, so the name might change, but right now it's being known as SP Nova DF, and it is so beautiful. That flat sinus with like the cheekbones, which actually reminds me a lot of Papillolamnum Ralph Lynam, where it has like the really cut cheekbones, you know, it kind of curves in, and it is so black. It has dropped in price quite a bit, which is why it's kind of near to the top of this list, but it is still not easily obtainable. But being suspected as possibly a pure species, if you self this plant, it's more likely to portray the same traits. It might look a little bit different, but it's gonna look a lot more like the parent plant than other things, like for example the circus peanuts. But to my knowledge, it's not that easy to breed. It's not impossible, but it's not the easiest thing to breed, so it's not going to be dropping quite as quickly. But I remember the very first time I saw this plant, and it was about a year ago, and I was just like, oh my gosh, it is so beautiful, and it's everything I love. It's dark, it's velvety, it has a wide sinus, it has minimal venation, it has a very interesting evil looking shape that it checks so many boxes for me, and it's an anthurium. So I would love to own this plant. It's not that I'm not willing to pay the price for it, but I shouldn't pay the price. Even if I sold like 5 to 10 plants in order to be able to pay for this, the responsible side of me says that I should be putting that money towards other more fiscally responsible things. And I'm very happy to be admiring it from afar. There are more and more photos now than before because more people own this plant. I also have heard that it pups a lot. It produces offsets, so just like left, right, and center. So that's kind of like a good thing. If you own this plant, it's kind of like good for business in the sense that you don't really have to try that hard to propagate it. It will just kind of propagate itself. Okay, so I need to make a little bit of a correction to the last wishlist video where I talked about Stripey. So Stripey, I said that it was the same as Stripey Meg. It is not the same as Stripey Meg. So I need to clarify some things. So Stripey, I put a little note in the last video, but I don't think people often look at the text on the screen sometimes. I did clarify that Stripey is a Tim Anderson plant. Tim Anderson is the breeder who created Wonder Boy, which then, you know, created all the Doc Block red crystallinum type plants like the Zara, the Michelle. It all kind of came from Wonder Boy. So he created Stripey and nobody really knows what Stripey is. So after that video, I summoned the courage to message Paul _ Oasis about Stripey Meg because I know that he owns one, and I read an offhand comment somewhere on Reddit that Stripey Meg only belongs to Paul. So I wanted to find out what he knew about Stripey Meg and how, if at all, it's related to Stripey. So he says that it is assumed, but not 100% known for sure, that Stripey Meg is a Stripey cross of the Meg, but kind of like a one-off from that batch. And he's the only one that he knows owns it. And he said he has never cut that plant. So Stripey Meg and Stripey, not the same. So Paul only uses Stripey Meg to breed with. He doesn't sell cuttings of it, and he has sold selfings of Stripey Meg, but never cuttings. So a selfed plant is not going to look exactly like Stripey Meg with like the super spidery venation. One day I might have the courage to message Bill Rotalante from Silver Chrome Gardens and ask him kind of more information on Stripey, but I feel like I've already like used up my reserves of bravery messaging Paul. And I was like a little bit less scared to message Paul just because like we follow each other on Instagram. Bill doesn't follow me. It's too much. It's too much social interaction for me. I would love to find out more about Stripey and like its origins. All I know is that it was created by Tim, and it is very, very difficult to find. It should probably be on this list. If I'm honest, it should probably be at the very end of this list, being that like very few people own this plant. But I wanted to make that correction and also mention Stripey and Stripey Meg because it will pertain to the next plant on this list, which is Anthurium Black Widow. So Black Widow is from Doc Block. So Doc Block has used a lot of Tim Anderson's plants in his brooding program. So like I said, Wonder Boy was used as the parent plant to Zara, Michelle, red crystallinum. And it is said that Stripey was used in the breeding of Black Widow, but Black Widow does look different to Stripey, but similar in some ways. It is so beautiful. It is like super dark, that pinstripe spidery venation. It looks like it has very roughly edges. So Black Widow, pretty much impossible to get a clone of this plant, but Black Widow is also used in a very well-known hybrid that is being shared quite a bit, which is Black Widow crossed with Michelle. And Doc Block is, I think, still creating this hybrid and will be releasing them soon. I don't know how soon. I think he releases specimens quite large, so they're not like little tiny seedlings when he releases them. So Black Widow Michelle, it's very variable. Obviously it's a hybrid, but I've seen quite a few different ones, and the ones that I really like are the ones that look more like Black Widow. So I've seen ones that look like this, that look a lot more like Michelle. They're more heart-shaped. They have more of that crystallinum-y venation. And then there are these ones that look a lot more like Black Widow with the very spidery venation, a little bit more of a wide sinus. This was on my list, I think, for a year, but I just didn't know enough to really talk about it. And I haven't seen anyone in Canada own or share this plant. It checks a lot of the same boxes for me as Anthurium basilisk, which I talked about in last week's video, which arguably should be on this video as well, because it is like a one-off and it's almost impossible to get a cutting of that, or probably I should say impossible to get a cutting of that, and it's super hyped. So Black Widow Michelle, like one with a wide sinus, spidery veins in those colors, I feel like would be a good even replacement for the basilisk for me. I mean, if I could own both, wouldn't say no to that, but I feel like Black Widow Michelle probably more obtainable, more people own it, more people are propagating it, etc, etc. Okay, so the last 4 are at the end of the list simply because they're in Australia. So if you're in Australia, this is probably not the same for you, although in saying that, I don't think they're cheap even if you're just buying it within Australia. So I don't think that it really matters what order I put this in. They're all difficult. So I'm gonna just order it in the way of like less hyped to most hyped. So the first one, maybe let's do Anthurium Midnight Velvet. So I'm gonna admit I don't know a lot about this plant. I just saw a picture, I looked at more pictures, they all look freaking beautiful. I wanna guess that it's possibly a Papillolamnum Dressleri hybrid. That's what it looks like to me. But it has such a gnarly shape. It looks a lot to me, actually. I'm going to switch the photo right now to Anthurium RA6. I'm pretty sure I'm remembering this correctly, but this particular photo of RA6 looks a lot like Midnight Velvet photos I've seen. It's like so elongated and tapered at the end. It looks like it just got smeared. You know what I mean? It looks like it should have ended sooner and it just kept going and going and going. So switching back to the Midnight Velvet picture, that's kind of why my mind went to Papillolamnum Dressleri, because it has kind of Dressleri characteristics, but I have never seen a petiole photo of this plant. So just, that's my guess. That's my best guess. If you know what Midnight Velvet is a hybrid of, let me know. I'm pretty sure it is a hybrid, and I'm pretty sure it is a mutated specimen within a seed batch of a hybrid. But what I love about this plant is the texture, the elongated leaves. I really do think it's Dressleri hybrid, you know? Because like that venation looks so Dressleri-y. It's so thin and sunken in, and it just like puffs out a lot in the leaf blade. And the colors of the emergent leaf is like very purpley, and it has a bit of a red sinus sometimes. And I don't know what it is about a red sinus that just, oh my gosh, it is so enchanting and just so adorable. But this plant, it's not an adorable plant. I wouldn't look at this plant and say, ooh, so cute. It's just so impressive and important looking. And I would love to own this plant, although I have high hopes that a Papillolamnum Dressleri hybrid can check the box for me. In looking at different specimens, it does look somewhat variable. Sometimes it has a wide sinus, sometimes it has like quite a heart shape, sometimes it's quite round, sometimes it's quite narrow. So yeah, it is not easy to obtain for sure. I think maybe a few people in North America have been getting plants in from Australia, but it is famously incredibly difficult to get plants out of Australia. It's very expensive. There's a way to do it legitimately, but it costs a lot, or so I've heard, but it costs a heck of a lot to get a plant out of Australia over to here. So on top of the selling price of the plant itself, you're paying a ton to get it out. So for anyone who has paid that amount to get those plants here over to this side of the world, they're not going to be selling it for very cheap either. So it's going to take a really long time for it to become available, first of all, and then more time after that for it to be accessible. I have never been to Australia, but if I do, I would love to just see it. I don't need to own it, just want to see it, want to touch it, and that's all I need. But I don't think I would be putting my life savings into trying to get that plant out of Australia over to here. If things were different for me and I feel like I could have a ton of expendable income in order to do that, that would be something that I could see doing for the sake of this hobby that I love so much, and it is like everything to me. But I'm just not there. So I'm happy to be happy for the people that own that plant. It's a lot. Like I would feel so much pressure to keep that plant alive and happy. So the next one is Anthurium Cape Oasis. This one really isn't talked about a lot. I searched for it in the anthuriums group to see if some people had like photos of it in their growing conditions, and I don't think I found a single one. So this is, I have to assume, is some sort of crystallinum mutation, possibly a hybrid, but probably one of those complex crystallinum mutations. And it's so cool. What veins do that? It comes out, right? Like every other anthurium, and it just like turns and it just goes out. Like it just goes whoo, and then whoop. And you don't really see that so much on the young leaves, but as it starts to mature a little bit, it starts to do a little bit of the curve. I don't know what it reminds me of, but it is incredibly beautiful. You know what? There must be magnificum in this hybrid, and it's so silvery, but the green part of the leaf looks extremely dark. As far as very silvery veined anthuriums go, this kind of stands out. This looks a lot more, I don't like to use the word unique when it comes to plants, but that venation is very unique. Like there's no other way to describe it. I can't think of another anthurium that is so veiny and does that weird little loop-de-loop thing. But if you can think of another anthurium that does that, let me know. It might just be slipping my mind. And going forward, I really hope that more people start to hybridize crystallinums, magnificums, just the amount of cool mutations that come out of breeding those two. I think it is super underrated, and I think people need to be doing it more. And it actually is like somewhat of a small prediction for me for 2024, 2025 is that because the plant boom happened in 2020, there are so many more hybridizers now than compared to like 5 years ago. And I don't want to make a prediction on what's going to be popular. I just think that there's going to be one-off hybrids, mutations, and things like that that are coming to market from amateur hybridizers that are going to keep this hobby very interesting and keep the anthurium niche in particular super interesting. And it's not just going to be the big names that are doing it, but I predict that a lot of cool things coming out are going to be crystallinum hybrids, magnificum hybrids, and things like that. But again, who knows? If it comes true, then cool. Okay, the next one is one that you guys probably know about, and that's Anthurium Hines. So I saw this photo a few years ago and I was just like, ugh, what the heck is that? It's round in shape and round in dimension as well. So this is actually a registered cultivar under the name Hines. So it was named after the former owner of Mission Beach Nursery, and his name was Hines Kraske. Hopefully I'm saying that right. But it was registered by Ian Sturgis, and the registry of this cultivar doesn't say anything about what's known of the parents. It's just like a complex crystallinum hybrid is what it's assumed to be. And I think what kind of sets it apart from a lot of like very, very silvery round plants like dorayaki is that the veins are quite vertical and very numerous and very thick. So I feel like it combines a lot of things that we like about red crystallinum, like the flecks of like silvery debris between the primary veins, and then the very thick silver and like the round shape of dorayaki, but it has a very like rounded leaf blade in dimension, like I mentioned. And it looks in some photos like it has a very silvery margin. Even on this emergent leaf, I can see a very light margin, and it almost looks in other photos like it hardens off silvery, which is very cool, like a very highlighted margin. This is a plant I never expect to own in my lifetime, but this would probably be the first plant that I go to look for, to like see in person. If I ever make it to Australia, this will be one plant that I want to visit because it's freaking adorable. It's such a great crystallinum hybrid. But this plant, as well as the Cape Oasis, I want to say is one of those plants that you have to grow to maturity to really appreciate it. A lot of anthuriums to me, I really love in that like kind of just out of juvenile state, but in that medium size, because it's so much easier to care for an anthurium that size. It's easier to give it optimal conditions inside of a greenhouse. And it's like, it's very cute. You can hold it in your hand and just kind of baby it a little bit more. And a lot of anthuriums will look quite beautiful at this age and quite distinct, and it's starting to show a lot of maturity characteristics. Whereas these plants, I feel like will look pretty much the same as any other silvery anthurium at that juvenile state. So you really have to grow it to full maturity to really get like the full potential of this plant, which is why it might be difficult to own this plant and get as much out of it as like these photos that we're seeing being circulated on the internet, because those are grown in optimal conditions to maturity over many years. And while I do have the patience to grow an anthurium out to maturity, I don't know that I have the ability to, if that makes sense. So are we on the last one? Yes, we are on the very last one. So this one is one that I've talked about before. It's anthurium Hoffmani Red Sinus, arguably the most well-known of the Australian anthuriums. So there's a lot of confusion of like what it is. How is it related to Hoffmanii? Is it at all related to Hoffmanii X? And it's not. So Hoffmanii X is what was sold as Dressleri out of Indonesia, but it's not. But it's not a Hoffmanii, but it's not a Dressleri. It's just kind of called Hoffmanii X. So that's what Hoffmanii X looks like. Hoffmani Red Sinus, on the other hand, is so much rounder, so much darker, has that red sinus, which is like so, I mean, it's why it's called Hoffmani Red Sinus, but it is so stinking cute. The veins are super minimal, but on a new leaf, they're quite red and it fades down to not so red, but the sinus sticks around for sure, that red color. I know a friend of mine has this plant. He took the pains to get it out of Australia into the States, and he's been sharing it with a few collectors, but I don't ever expect to own this plant because I know how expensive it is, and nothing in my collection is worth a trade for this plant. There just isn't. You're just calling a spade, and I am really happy just to see photos of it and not feel the pressure of having to grow it. I think maybe give it a year and I would feel a little bit more confident in my ability to grow anthuriums, but as of right now, I don't know that I would be up for the I would be up for the challenge, but a part of me would be very scared to grow this plant because of how much it costs, not just to buy the plant, but also in terms of logistically getting it here. I don't know if much is known about what the parent plants of this plant is and what kind of hybrid it is. I don't think it's a pure species, but to me, there's very few plants that look this black, like inky black. Pretty much every photo I've seen of this plant looks this black. I don't think it's like a huge manipulation of conditions in order to get it that black. Some plants you have to really manipulate the conditions, and otherwise it will like start looking quite green. But to me, this checks a lot of the same boxes for me as anthurium red vein dark phoenix or red dark phoenix in the colors, the venation colors, like the thinness of the veins and how minimal it looks, and that kind of leathery texture, but it's round and fat, which is like, I love that in an anthurium as much as I love a really like evil looking wispy narrow anthurium. I also really enjoy the really wide leaf round anthuriums. They each do something different to my brain, but they just, it's so nice to have a wide variety of shapes, and I really like this plant. Maybe in a few years it might be more obtainable, but as of right now, this is one of the most unobtainable plants on this list because it's an Australian plant, and also because it is very popular, very coveted, and very expensive. Whereas I would argue that there's some things on this list that aren't talked about as much and maybe like wouldn't have as much of a lineup of people trying to get it, but this plant is probably right up there. So that is my list of unattainable anthuriums. If you own any of these plants, or if you are located in Australia, or if you have a friend who has this plant, let me know if it's worth the hype, if it really lives up to the hype. Sometimes I feel like a plant might be super hypey, but because very few people own it, not enough people can speak to like whether or not it's like fulfilling to grow. So if you're able to like either affirm those ideas or dispel any misconceptions, I would love to hear it in the comments. Similarly, if there are other plants that are on this like tier of unobtainable, just nobody owns this, but are really beautiful and worth pining after, I would love to know about it, because I like to pine after things. I like to drool over things that I can't own because it keeps things interesting. It really does. It really just keeps this hobby fresh for me. But yeah, that's it. Hope you enjoyed this video. More plant chores are coming, more vlogs are coming. I wanted to take this opportunity to ask your opinion. I had this idea of making like quiet plant chores, like show you the plants, like some talking at the beginning to show you what I'm gonna do with the plants, and then like a huge long segment of minimal editing and minimal talking and just the sounds of repotting. Please let me know if that's something you would be interested in like the way that you watch plant videos, or if you would not be interested at all, because I had this idea because I realized that I really like the sounds of repotting, but I know a lot of people watch these videos to like obviously do plant chores, but some people watch it to like fall asleep. So I'm wondering how many of you would actually find that interesting or something that you'd want to watch. And if you're not interested in that, I would not be offended at all, but I would just want to kind of gauge the room a little bit. So if you have any thoughts on that, let me know. I don't intend for it to be ASMR with like a high quality mic and just like satisfying sounds. Is really just ambient noise of repotting that to me is really relaxing and soothing, but I don't know about you guys. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. Have a great rest of the day and I will see you in the next one. Mwah.